Now, today is a real special treat for us because Dr. Jon Bloom here, who is our science advisor to the Socrates team, and thank you, John, for being that, because he's our data checker, truth checker for all the stuff that we put out to make sure that it's up to date and accurate. And John has a PhD in physics from Cornell University. You might remember Carl Sagan, the universe is all there is, all there ever was, all there will be. Yeah, he was the Cornell astronomer that came up with that one. And then he also has a PhD in ancient medieval, how do you? Okay, studies. And so we call him a paradox. Pair of docs? Okay. John, come on up with me here. John, I think to get started here, we're going to take a look at this famous quote here by probably one of the most famous astronomers of the 20th century, Fred Hoyle. Fred Hoyle was a self-declared atheist, but he absolutely a brilliant guy. He's founded the Institute for Theoretical Astronomy in Cambridge, and he's the one that came up with a lot of the theory of how the elements were formed inside of stars. I mean, it's just fascinating, and John's going to talk a little bit about that. He's the one that gave the Big Bang Theory its name, as a matter of fact. And as a self-declared atheist, he made some predictions from a theoretical standpoint, didn't he, that didn't think it could possibly be reproduced in a laboratory, which is the scientific method. And he was so fascinated by how that happened that he was looking for a way to validate it. But when it did get validated, this is what he said. I'm going to read this. A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as chemistry and biology. There are no blind forces worth even speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. We've talked about this quote many times, that it just thrills us, but I'd like you to comment on it before you start your talk.
Sure. Well, Fred Hoyle was trying to figure out, okay, this Big Bang Theory, or however the universe started, would only make hydrogen, protons. So how did you get carbon and all the other elements in the periodic table from just the hydrogen? Well, Hans Bethe, who was at Cornell, had figured out that hydrogen can fuse to make helium, and that's what powers stars, the hydrogen fusion process. But nobody could figure out how to go beyond helium to make carbon or anything else, based on what people knew back in the 1950s. So Hoyle goes, wait, we're here. Life is made of carbon. Carbon has to be really plentiful in the universe for us to be here. So there's got to be some process that makes carbon easily inside of stars. So, and people are like, well, we don't see any way it could work. There are various models that people had. So as Hoyle looked at it, he said, wait, if the carbon nucleus has a particular energy resonance point, that's the combination of the energy of three alpha particles, three heliums coming together all at once, then that would make carbon plentiful. So he predicted this particular nuclear state in the carbon atom, and he beat up people to actually try to measure it. And finally, one guy who's a postdoc looking for something to do at Caltech did the experiment and found it. And it was when his prediction was discovered to be experimentally true, and that's why carbon's common in the universe, that he made this comment. This is in print. What he told colleagues informally, I've heard, was, nothing quite shook my faith in atheism as discovering that my prediction was actually true. That's what made carbon plentiful.
Excellent. And you're going to hear some other stories today from Dr. Jon. So let's welcome Dr. Jon Bloom.
Thank you. So the question that Stu gave me was not nuclear synthesis per se, but it was this question. Can a scientist believe in miracles? So I want to kind of start with, okay, what's a scientist? What are miracles? To kind of define terms a little bit here. So let me start with what's a scientist, and I think I'm a scientist, so I guess I'll give you a little bit of my background for this. As Stu mentioned, I was fortunate enough to get accepted into the grad programs at Cornell University, and that's the most beautiful place on earth, by the way, if you've never been there. And the space sciences program is really big at Cornell. I thought I loved astronomy, so I thought about doing astrophysics. Frank Drake, famous for the Drake equation, was there. And Carl Sagan had just kind of come. He wasn't world famous yet. He was kind of a big man on campus. He was involved with the Viking and the Voyager missions, as was Drake, and the radio telescope at Arecibo and so on. So there were a lot of great things happening in astrophysics there at Cornell. The problem I realized as a graduate student was there were not any jobs in astrophysics. Okay, so if I'm going to grad school and I plan to get out, and then what could I do? So what I did is I went more the boring route. I went into physics rather than astrophysics, and I studied under Watt Webb, who, well, he was a household name for me. Okay, but that's because I was one of his students. But he was actually he did 6 different distinct disciplines over his career. He was the first to develop a stable superconducting magnet, for example. But when I was there in the mid to late 70s, he was into biophysics, especially doing fluorescence microscopy, which is a huge field and has really exploded today. So that was my work, was in biophysics with him. And after I left, unfortunately, he became even more famous. He developed a 2-photon fluorescence microscopy technique. This is kind of mind-blowing, but okay, if you want to make something glow, you shine light on it and then it glows, right? So the left picture there shows a laser in kind of the blue wavelength, illuminating fluorescein, which glows off in the yellow. And it's focused down through a microscope objective to focus down to a point. That's the normal fluorescence technique, is you illuminate it with light and then it glows at a slightly longer wavelength. Well, what he and a postdoc developed was a technique where instead of using, blue-green light at 488 nanometers, if you illuminate with infrared light at half that or twice that wavelength, half that frequency, 2 photons at 960 equals 1 photon at 980, close enough, okay? And that's what you see happening there in that right picture, where the infrared beam is coming in. When it gets concentrated enough that 2 photons are basically hitting the same molecule at the same time, boop, both get absorbed and the thing glows. Wait. 2 things with half the energy equals 1 thing with the full energy. Yeah. Hey, guess what? So that's a major technique now in the microscopy world that he developed. So again, he did a number of groundbreaking things in the world. Again, I'm there as a graduate student, and one thing I really loved about Watt was what could get him excited was when we showed something was wrong. It's like, yes! Yoo, good! Okay, we showed this model's wrong and that model's wrong. It's like, it's kind of interesting. You normally get excited when you're right or you think you're right. He'd get excited when we showed that something clearly was wrong. So that's kind of the attitude that Richard Feynman had and Thomas Edison had, that you really make progress when you show something's wrong, right? And one of the things he says, look, we don't just work to show that our model's right. We try to, again, do everything we can to show that our model, our idea is wrong, as well as trying to demonstrate that it's right. So again, the thing that came through, day after day, week after week, was this, that our goal, working in the lab as scientists, is to seek truth. That's what we're here for, guys. And that especially got emphasized when a postdoc for one of the colleagues that he was working with came up with some really fantastic method. It was going to be a real groundbreaking thing as a result, but only he could get it to work. And then one day he quit showing up in the lab and devastated that whole research team. So again, Watt to us is like, man, we are here to show how we're wrong, to show, okay, what else is wrong? But we are here, that's our main goal, is just to seek truth. So me as a scientist just got that embedded, right? Okay, what do you do as a scientist? You seek truth. I'm sorry, that's what you do. So that's my definition of a scientist, right? Somebody who seeks truth. What do I mean by a miracle? And that word gets thrown around a lot, and so on. So I want to be careful with it. There's really highly improbable things that happen. And I would put that in a category of maybe providence or something like that in terms of a term. What I mean and what I'll refer to as a miracle in the talk here is something that's quite literally physically impossible, okay? You don't take 2 loaves and 5 fishes and feed thousands of people with it or something like that. That is just physically impossible, I'm sorry. And, some people today will say, well, primitive people back then were superstitious and so on. So they thought it was a miracle, but today, with our sophisticated knowledge, we know it was just whatever, So no. What I'm talking about as a miracle is stuff that people back then knew was physically impossible, and people today still say it's physically impossible. I'm sorry, that just can't happen. So again, I'm using a very tight definition of miracle here to talk about that. Well, if that's your definition of miracle, something that's physically impossible, then hey, you're a physicist. Didn't you realize that that's just sort of like breaking the laws of physics to have something like that happen? And those laws are pretty incredible. I love them. I should have my T-shirt but anyhow. Law of gravity, conservation of energy, conservation of momentum. I mean, that's what Elon Musk uses all the time to shoot rockets off into space. We've gone to the moon. We've shot probes out to Pluto. They give us this huge ability to predict what's going to happen, right? And to me, this is incredible. Okay, so you can shoot a rocket off to space. You can land the thing on its tail again. Is pretty incredible to be able to do. But that's what the laws of physics allow us to do. That we study nature, we observe what goes on, and from that we deduce these regularities, these laws that allow us to do these incredible things based on the knowledge that we've gained from those observations. So science, the laws of physics, are fantastic for telling us what normally is going to happen. That's their power. But I don't know if you've invested in the stock market or not, but one of the things that they say there is, now past performance is no guarantee of future returns. And that's an assumption that we're making then when we take the laws of physics and start looking forward in time. We're like assuming that, okay, those things are going to be constant, they're never going to change, even for some special purpose. Okay, so again, we're making an assumption when we run them forward in time. And what's interesting, I've interacted with people who are fans of the multiverse idea that there's billions and billions of other universes out there, and we just happen to be the lucky one, who've told me that, the laws of physics might not be constant. There's no logical reason for them to stay constant over time. So we might be in a universe where 15 minutes from now or so, we all turn into green cheese. I mean, there's nothing logically that says that the laws of physics have to be constant. So it's like, well, yeah, they're right. I'm not sure I'm going to turn into green cheese, but that's one of the issues with the laws of physics, is it's what we've observed in the past. They work incredibly well. They allow us to predict the future. But my point here is that, it's that regularity of the laws of physics that allows us to recognize something weird has happened, right? Because if the world were chaotic and not predictable, then we wouldn't recognize anything special or out of the ordinary because there's nothing really ordinary. So the laws of physics actually give us this power to recognize when something weird has happened. So they're beneficial to us in that regard. So what's going on with a miracle? Well, it's some departure from what we would expect as the normal and uniform behavior that normally characterizes the world. And just to give maybe one example for it here, if we were sitting here watching this pool table with the balls racked up on it, and suddenly the 8-ball started to vibrate in such a way that it knocked all the other balls into their pockets, you'd go, that wasn't the laws of physics causing that to happen. Okay, so it's possible that some outside agent could override or suspend the laws or something like that to make something like a miracle happen. One way I've kind of phrased the question is, if there's a creator out there, could he make laws that he could not break? And well, I've heard that question phrased in another way. A skeptic friend of mine says, "Oh, wait a second. You think like God's all powerful, right? Yeah. And you think like God can create anything, right? Yeah. So tell me, can God create a stone so heavy that he cannot lift it?" This is the same question, right? Can the creator make laws that he cannot break? It's the same logical question. Well, back to the stone, after thinking about that for 2 weeks and taking a few showers, it finally dawned on me, oh, God's not that dumb, right? To make a stone so heavy he can't lift it. So this would be my answer to this one. God's not that dumb. He's not going to make a universe with laws that he cannot break. At least that's one possible answer to it. So that's one thing. Maybe the laws of physics are things that God can, if there is a God or a creator out there, that, we see them as regular, but there's nothing that says that he couldn't set it aside or work around it in some way. There's another answer to that question as well, and that would be looking at this racked set of billiard balls here. What I would do is I'd pick up a cue stick, find a billiard ball, and with millions of years of practice, I would hope to be at the point that I could hit the cue, use the cue, hit the ball, and knock everything into their pockets except the 8-ball. Did I break any laws of physics in doing that? No, because I picked up the cue ball, found the billiard ball, and hit it in just the right way to accomplish that. So perhaps some agent out there can work within the laws with some outside influence, not having to break any laws, but just work within the laws to accomplish his purpose. Here the idea is that, nature's an open system, not a closed system. So some outside influence could work within the laws to accomplish whatever purpose they deem necessary. To give you another picture for this, that cello perfectly obeys the laws of physics. The musician playing it does not break any laws of physics at all, but yet plays beautiful music, gets that cello to sing, makes me cry, right? It's like, okay, so an outside agent can influence a system to accomplish whatever purpose he wants to do. That would be a good analogy for it. So again, there's sort of two answers to this. Maybe a creator can set aside the laws of physics if needed, or maybe they work within the laws of physics to accomplish their purpose. That would be one thing I could see as a scientist with this. Another fundamental issue with physics in general, science more broadly, is what John Wheeler referred to as the fire in the equations. Okay, and Stephen Hawking comments on this in his final section of Brief History of Time, where he says, look, even if there's only one possible unified theory, that's just a set of rules and equations. What is it that breathes fire into the equations and makes a universe for them to describe? The usual approach of science of constructing a mathematical model cannot answer the questions of why there should be a universe for the model to describe, right? So that's one of the weaknesses of science, if you might want to think of it that way. Yeah, I use equations, I develop equations, I come up with my theories and my models and all that. But those things are just describing the behavior. They're not creating the behavior or enforcing the behavior. These are just observations of the world that we're making, that we're very good at describing these things, but we're not, those equations don't make the universe behave or run. So thinking as a scientist then, you're like, man, there could be some outside agent who's actually putting the fire into those equations that I've discovered. Maybe even created the universe or something like that itself. So from the science side, that's a very open question. Where did it come from? How did it get here? Sort of a thing. Except, as Stu kind of said, you can't talk about that. Okay, because what's happened today is that science has assumed or presumed naturalism. But the very question we're raising is, well, can there be miracles and so on, well, naturalism is one of the answers for that. So what do I mean by naturalism? Okay, better stop and define that for a bit. Another word for it is materialism, but in the West, materialism is being rich and famous and all of that, so philosophers tend to use the term naturalism. And Carl Sagan summarized it really well in his intro to the Cosmos series. The cosmos is all there is, or was, or ever will be. Oh, wow, okay, sorry. Okay, but what's he saying? Okay, matter and energy is all that there is. That's the basic point with this. There's nothing supernatural, no God or spirits or soul or anything like that. All there is matter and energy. That's what naturalism or materialism, that's the philosophical positions that those take. I just wanted to point out that that's a religious position. Okay, now a lot of people think, well, wait, religion is believing in God and, burning candles and that kind of a thing, This isn't religious. Well, it is, because it's telling us things about the supernatural, right? Basically saying there is none. So legally, even, naturalism, materialism is a religious position, even though it doesn't go to church or whatever there is. So who's advocating this view, this attitude? Well, St. Carl was very good at doing that, and the Cosmos series continues to advocate that position. But people that also advocated it were William Provine, Bill Provine. He was at Cornell, encountered him a bit. He was more in evolutionary biology. More famous person was Daniel Dennett at Tufts University. He recently died. And their approach to this, their attitude, conclusion from a naturalistic perspective was that you're just meat, okay? You have an interesting couple pounds of meat up there, and that's all you are, right? Is you're just atoms in motion, your thoughts are just chemical reactions. And if that's the case, then you have no real free will. Because everything is just atoms in motion, so the thoughts you have now come from atoms moving a few seconds ago. Those motions came from atoms a few more seconds ago. You can trace everything down to atoms colliding with other atoms. Basically, you actually have no real free will. It's all deterministic, reductionistic, and so on. Yeah, you see people talk about quantum fluctuations and stuff like that, but you really have no free will. Okay, you're just predetermined by what the atoms in your brain are doing. And I'm like, well, if I'm predetermined by what the atoms in my brain are doing, then, and I don't really have any free will, then why are you trying to convince me of this? My atoms were predetermined before Provine and Dennett were born. So why are you trying to convince me that I have no free will? I don't know. It just seems like I have a free won't, right? As well as, yeah. So to me, there's a real weakness with materialism in trying to explain what am I thinking, Why am I thinking? How am I even able to think? So again, it's something that Stu's talked about in other sessions, but this is one of the weaknesses I see with materialism that I just wanted to mention, that there's got to be something more going on than just atoms knocking around on neurons inside my brain. There's got to be something beyond the physical, just in my own thinking, the fact that I am able to think and then that I'm conscious. Michael Egner is a name to jot down. He's coming out with a book next year, unfortunately. But there's other things that are out, material. You can Google his name and get some YouTube videos of him. He's a neurosurgeon, and he gives a number of good arguments that there's something beyond the physical involved in our ability to think and so on. So again, to me, that's one of the weaknesses with materialism. There's another weakness I just wanted to mention in passing as well. Okay, so if everything is just atoms in motion, colliding with each other, and somehow life got here through some sort of unguided process, right, whatever you want to call it, you get this horrid doubt that shows up. If we only got here through unguided random processes. This horrid doubt with me arises whether the convictions of a man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there were any convictions in such a mind? And the guy who's behind this is Charles Darwin himself. Okay? He came up with a naturalistic explanation for how we got here, and he realized that if that's true, if it's just some unguided, whatever best mutation happened to give rise to this, how can we trust our thinking? I'm like, man, if you want to insist that science must be naturalistic, you've just undercut your whole thinking process, which is what you're trying to do as a scientist, right? I can't trust my ability to think. I certainly can't trust my ability to find truth because it was survival of the fittest that got me here. So that's one of the issues that comes up with materialism, naturalism as sort of a fundamental philosophy in science today. So let me just kind of summarize where we've sort of been. There's this religious commitment in science today, unfortunately. It's this naturalistic assumption. It's materialism is another way to say it. Now, some people will say, no, wait a second. You can be a scientist and you can believe in God and go to church and do all those sorts of things. But when you're in the lab, when you're doing science, methodologically, you have to be a naturalist. Okay, so every explanation that you give as a scientist must be naturalistic. Whatever you believe is, whatever you want to believe, but in the lab, you've got to be a naturalist. And so my question is that really a justifiable assumption to make? That every explanation that I give must be naturalistic. And it's okay to say, okay, we're going to look for physical causes for physical effects. I mean, that's what I do in the lab, right? It's a good starting point, duh. So looking for physical causes for physical effects is absolutely great. You can demonstrate that most of the time by mixing the things together and watching it explode, right? So you can demonstrate physical causes for physical effects most of the time. If it's something that's repeatable, then certainly that's a reasonable assumption that there's physical effects for physical causes for physical effects. I don't expect there to be continuous miracles, right? I mean, this even came up for Isaac Newton, centuries ago. It's like, if you start evoking a continuous miracle to explain why something is the way it is, I think we're missing the boat. We should look for some sort of a physical law to explain that effect. So yeah, it's a great place to start. Certainly is fruitful for research. It certainly gives us things that are very powerful for predicting events. But the naturalistic assumption says, no. All of the time, you must conclude some naturalistic process. is that justified all of the time, is the question of miracles. So let me think about that for a bit. Is it justified all of the time? Well, Stu was showing some really great Chandra images before, but this is the James Webb Space Telescope deep field image. It's a galaxy cluster there, so those distorted galaxies off in the distance show general relativity in action. You're getting light distorted through the lensing effect. But you can barely see them, but it's the tiny little specks in the background that were beyond the range of the Hubble Space Telescope to see, because this is an infrared image that's been converted into visible light so we can see it, okay, with our eyes. But that stuff is way beyond in distance what the Hubble was seeing with its images. Well, that had a beginning, right? Hasn't always been here. It's been expanding away. And whatever made that is obviously powerful to make billions and billions of galaxies go flying billions and billions of light years out there. Incredible power, pretty smart too, I would guess. And any being that can make a universe like that, well, what might they be like? Maybe they would have an interest in communicating with us. How can you say something like that based on looking at this? However fancy the deep field image is and how vast the universe is in terms of its space, we're the most complex thing in the universe, at least that we know of. Whoever created that entire universe, as incredible as it is, we're the most complex things in it. I've seen that at the end of astronomy books. You marvel at the vastness of the universe, but our minds are actually more sophisticated, more complex, more profound than the rest of the universe. So maybe any being that made the universe might have an interest in communicating with us because, again, we're the most complex things that they made. Okay. Another feature, you start looking at things on the Earth here. And we mentioned Fred Hoyle and so on, the craftsmanship necessary to make a planet that can support life. And, as Fred Hoyle was shocked about the properties of carbon that made it common in the universe, the fine-tuning that's out there to make carbon the way it is, who's got the patent on that, right? Oh yeah, and then water. You can write books on the properties of water that make it so incredible as a solvent for living systems and so on. Who's got the patents on that? Okay, well, whoever's smart enough to design that fine-tuning into a universe that makes life possible in it somewhere, if they've got the power to design and think and create, then if they want to do a miracle every once in a while, I'm not going to say no, okay? It's like, man, it's just incredible. Another feature, this is, my biophysics side of things, you look at the engineering capabilities in living systems. This is the core of a bacterial flagellum. So let's see, it's got these protein noodles, because that's all these things are, is little strings of amino acids that fold up, these noodles that fold up to make these various aspects of the structure. You've got bearings, you've got a drive shaft, you've got the rotor, the stator isn't shown in this. There's a pump in the bottom that pumps through that hollow channel to make it. You've got a universal joint. You can see how fluffy that upper stuff is. It's very flexible, it folds easily. You just look at the complexity in living systems and you go, anybody who's got the power to design and craft things like this, if they want to suspend the laws in some location for a moment to do something, or if they want to work within those laws to accomplish some special purpose, I think they'd have the ability to do that. Whoever created this would have the ability to do those sorts of things. And the points I'm mentioning here, as Stu said, the Socrates at Saddleback has been going on for some time. And if you want more background on those, I'm just sort of giving one slide to each point. But go see the videos that Stu's made if you want to look into the details more on that. But that's the basic point, is that whoever made all this, if they wanted to get our attention to people who don't have telescopes or microscopes to marvel at the creation in the detailed way that we can do so today, if you wanted to get our attention, how would you do it? You do something really out of the ordinary. And you don't expect that to be common every day or whatever, but you would go, if they wanted to communicate with us, how would they get our attention? Well, it would be by breaking the norms, breaking the regularities that we're used to in the world, and going, there's something more going on here, I should pay attention to it. So, to just sort of wrap up where we've been, it's the regularities of the world that science studies that allows us to recognize miracles in the first place. If it was a chaotic world, we wouldn't expect them. We wouldn't know how to look for them. Again, science itself can only rule out miracles philosophically with an a priori assumption that's basically religious in nature, right? The naturalism, materialism assumption that rules it out. Science itself can't do that. But again, if as a scientist, my goal is to seek truth rather than the best naturalistic explanation that I can convince my colleagues to keep funding, right? If my goal as a scientist is to seek truth, then I just have to say, this could happen. And we need to look at the evidence for any particular miracle claim out there and see whether that actually bears up and is worth trusting or believing in. So, and again, as I've tried to say here, from my perspective at least, if I look at the creation of the universe, if I look at the craftsmanship in the universe and on the earth and in living systems themselves, whatever being out there has made the universe and is able to do all this, they'd have the ability to do miracles very, very easily. It just would come with the business card, creator, sustainer, and miracles. It would just be right there. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. It's great. Have a seat, please. We're going to have a fun time of a little cross-examination of our two board members that are going to help us today. You've seen them before in the past. Dick Hardy, who's our resident chemist and former skeptic, let's put it that way a little bit, and Greg Schrock, our in-house philosopher. We're going to have a little fun discussion with cross-examination with John. And then when we're done with that, then it's your turn. This is actually the most fun part, is the discussion back and forth, because we know we have a mix of believers and non-believers, and people aren't so sure in between, and the idea is to hear other people and where they're coming from and the kind of questions they have and the answers that other people give. So that's why Socrates is one of our favorite things to do. So I'm going to start it off, John, because this thing about naturalism that you brought up and materialism just really ached on me when in my 30s, because I said, there has to be some kind of scientific explanation for all these questions of where I came from and where I'm going and why am I here? And I couldn't get there from here. I mean, there was no way. And then I said, well, why didn't we ever discuss this in any of our classes? Why didn't even we have a sidebar class to discuss this? And I'm really perturbed about it, and I'll tell you why. Because even when people like me in the universities today bring these subjects up, they get reported to the dean. They get reported to the dean because they're discussing religious topics. There's nothing more religious about what you just said about a religious topic. I mean, the idea that who gave the academy, here's my question, who gave the academy the right to shut down this kind of discussion? I mean, our scientists that formulated the scientific process were believers in God. In fact, the reason Isaac Newton and Galileo and Copernicus and so forth went out they wanted to discover the mind of God because they saw what you saw. You said, what a fantastic mind. Who is the patent on that? I want the patent on that. I want to be able to explain that. So we had that for 17th century, 18th century, then all of a sudden, today, the lawsuit. If a science teacher brings this up in the public school system, right away there's a lawsuit. How did this happen?
Well, it's called the history of science, okay, which should probably be taught along with the laws of physics and so on as well. But it goes back to the late into the 1700s, I guess. It's called the Enlightenment movement. That's when skeptics started to get sort of an academic foothold and say, Aristotle was wrong with his physics and Plato was kind of crazy with his ideas, so we can't trust any of these old sources like the Bible or whatever. So we just need to think on our own. So it kind of started with that revolt in the Enlightenment movement. But interestingly enough, Darwin was the one who kind of cemented it in place. Because in Origin of Species, Darwin said we have to come up with scientific explanations for everything. We can't have any God stuff around. So that kind of, he and then Huxley and others kind of ran with science as giving these, science can only give naturalistic explanations. God's not allowed, into the
But what gave him the right to say that? I mean, he had the right to say it. He could say anything he wanted. He published a book. I mean, anybody can publish a book. Why did the Academy just not only open up their arms to it, but say, that's how we're going to do science from now on?
You got to get into sociology and the culture of science. But a lot of it was Huxley arguing that we need science to give us truth. Positivism, if you're a philosopher, is what was at the root of this. Positivism, that science is our path to truth. Darwin has given us our creation story now, so we don't need the Bible anymore. So it was just kind of selling science as it's going to give us the answers to everything, and we don't need the church to help us anymore.
So they were hopelessly optimistic that we have it all figured out. We can figure out how to do one of those. Huh?
Right. And what I find fun is how science, especially since the 1970s, with sort of this fine-tuning an aspect, has suddenly made it kind of embarrassing. Because, back when I was in grad school, the multiverse idea was kicked around as a joke. Okay, but now that's the best explanation for why we're here. Because the odds on everything falling into place to make a universe like ours, with a planet like ours, with life like ours, is so small that the only naturalistic answer to that is that there must be billions and billions of other universes out there, so that we're not weird. You throw the dice more when the odds get really high. And so I find it kind of fun to be a Christian in the sciences nowadays, because you can ask embarrassing questions really easily,
Well, there's a new science, as you know, last 25, 30 years. We call it intelligent design, which is adding engineering principles to biology and understanding engineering, how the fine-tuning of the universe is, and so forth. That's not, as you know, as an educator, you can't even bring that up. You can't even have it as a sidebar class without being criticized. So what can be done about this?
That's tough. How do you change an academic culture? You cannot do it politically. You can't do it. I'm kind of stuck on that, actually.
Yeah, I am too.
In terms of,
that's why we do Socrates.
How do you change a culture? Now, if you look at Thomas Kuhn wrote a book called scientific revolutions. And he analyzed Copernicus historically and how did the shift from geocentrism to heliocentrism work. And you basically need to have kind of a major paradigm change. And the way that happens in Kuhn's model is the existing model fails to explain what's going on. And I think we're seeing that now. Like I mentioned, the multiverse is being given as the best answer for why we're here. So people are seeing the weakness with the naturalistic model, and just to keep pushing and kind of praying and shoving on that is, I think, what will eventually break it. What's been fun with intelligent design is the evolutionary model looked at the Human Genome Project, where less than 2% of the DNA actually codes for proteins. And they looked at the other 98% or so of human DNA and said, see, that's junk DNA. It doesn't code for proteins. It's not doing anything. It's just our evolutionary flotsam and jetsam, of how we got here. Well, that blocked research for like 20 years. Cells are not dumb. They're not going to be replicating 98% of this DNA if it's not useful for something, right? So ID people were like, I bet you there's function in that junk DNA. And that's been proven to be right.
Yeah, isn't that exciting? That was so exciting.
It's incredible to see. Now they're saying, well over 80% of that junk DNA actually serves some purpose and function in the life of the organism or the cell. And there's some hardcore evolutionists that are just absolutely resisting that, because they realize if a huge percentage of our DNA is actually functional, then there's no evolutionary history there. And it's like, then Darwin's wrong.
Well, the paradigm just has to shift.
Paradigm has to shift.
As somebody said, the paradigm shift occurs when the last conservative from the old paradigm dies at the last funeral or something like that.
Yeah. Science advances one funeral at a time.
One funeral at a time. There you go.
That's one way it was said. But it is often paradigm shifts, and probably the most recent one in people's memory was in geology. Plate tectonics prior to, I forget the year, 1970s or so, was laughed at, literally laughed at. That can't be, there's no geological forces that can move continents around on the earth. Okay, so that's just totally ridiculous idea. Until enough evidence accumulated that, I'm sorry, that's what's going on. You can see the ocean floor is spreading and so on now.
Well, we love science. I mean, we love science, and science. It's not the science that's the problem. It's the materialistic philosophy laid on top of the science that forces our students to just know you can only go for naturalistic answers. So that's great. I want to say, by the way, if you go out to the web, all this is documented. We did 3 years of this kind of investigation, and please go to see the video cast on all the things that Jon talked about. Let's move on to Dick. He's our resident scientist on the board. So,
Dr. Bloom, I have a question for you. You touched on it in your talk, but it still leaves a question in my mind. The question of a miracle happening because God might manipulate the laws that he's already created versus just making it happen. And as a chemist, I always used to struggle with that question, and I looked for the chemistry behind changing water to wine, or the biology behind curing a leper. But my question is, what do you believe? Does God use the rules and laws of physics and chemistry to make things happen? Or does he just make them happen? Bam! Things have changed. What do you believe?
Well, I think some combination of the two. It depends on the event or the miracle. There's some things where, like resurrection or healing a leper or turning water into wine. There's no carbon in water, so where did the sugars come from? So those are things that I think, at least my sense is, God just kind of, okay, we set that law aside and poof, do something. But there's other events in the Bible that one could call miraculous more broadly, that it seems to be the timing of some natural event that caused it. One would be like, say, the walls of Jericho collapsing. That could be, okay, the people were marching around, and after they blew the trumpets and shouted, God says, let's have an earthquake happen right now to collapse the walls. So that could be God's working within the natural laws, not breaking any natural laws, but it's the timing of the event that is miraculous, if you will. It's a softer definition of miracle. And then another one is when Joshua tells the priests carrying the ark to go to the Jordan in flood stage, and when your feet touch the river, the waters will dry up. And then it says that God stopped the waters upstream at Adam, a place called Adam or in Zarephath. And, the Jordan goes through some cliffs at that point, and there's recorded in history times where a rock slide came in and blocked the flow of the Jordan. So that would be another, okay, God caused a rock slide, poof, to stop the waters right at that time. So there seem to be ones where God's working within, quote, natural events, but it's the timing of the event that we would call as miraculous or a sign. And then there's other ones that it just looks to me like God set aside the laws of physics to do something. So.
Greg.
Yeah, thank you for your illuminating talk. It was very good to hear. I'm piggybacking a little bit on Dick's question. I'm kind of fascinated with this, your definition of miracle versus providence, some God acting providentially in somebody's life. The word miracle is tossed around all the time in today's world. It's a miracle the Cubs won the World Series after 108 years, that kind of thing.
Did they?
in 2016, I think they did, yes. But also you hear things like, I was scheduled for that flight and something held me up in traffic and that flight ended up crashing, and it's a miracle. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. In today's world, certainly if there's a creator that created everything, these deep sky objects that you see, and also the complexity of our cells and of these little motors and everything, certainly God can act from outside of nature and do something. But what do you think about, like, in today's world, does that kind of miracle still happen, or is God just acting providentially in our lives?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think a lot of God's action is within the providential realm of just, timing and so on. A joke, okay, it's providential that I met my wife. Just all the circumstances that we would meet each other and so on. It's a miracle that she stayed married to me for 47 years. But yeah, it tells you what character I am. But the there are some Christians who would say, no, God does not do miracles today. But I don't tell God what he cannot do. So I think it's fully possible that God can. And I've heard reports from people that I can't say that, that it really would have been a miracle had I been in to see it, that they really have experienced a miracle. So I think they occur. One thing I've heard people say is that, how do I say this? That we don't see too many miracles in the West because our level of belief is so low. that it's sort of like Jesus couldn't do many miracles at Nazareth because nobody really believed in him and so on. That, but you get off into countries where they have no medical, they have no whatever. Their only hope is that God might heal them, where they really do see some pretty incredible things. So, again, if you're a skeptic, you can say, well, whatever, you know. But again, I've heard some reports from people that I trust that are like, no, that there's still things out there that God's able to do. So, yeah.
Yeah, I coming from the missions world, I understand that too, and I think that's very true. And it's anecdotal evidence, of course,
Sure.
but people that I trust have attested that they have seen these types of things happen. But it isn't in the West. You're right. It's in these other countries.
Yeah.
We've got a little time left before we open it up to the attendees. So I want to ask one more question. And this relates to another question that I've had for a long time. And it seems like we talked about miracles of chemical changes like water to wine, miracles like biological changes, restoring the sight or curing somebody, or geological changes, calming the seas and so forth. All these things that were accredited miracles in the Bible. But some of these could be viewed as the writer using a metaphor, using a phrase or a concept where he is symbolic, something like that. Just about all the miracles have some symbolic reference. Could miracles just be symbolic in the Bible?
Well, that's a common way that skeptics will try to explain away what's in the Bible, is that, well, it was either a legend that grew up over time, or it was just a metaphor. Jesus really didn't multiply those loaves and fishes. It was his spiritual teaching that nourished them or something. So there's lots of explanations that people will give like that, but again, if you actually read the biblical account, that's not what the biblical account seems to be saying. Is that, no, the people there that were fed followed Jesus so that they could be fed again. It wasn't just a great message that fed them. They were hungry, physically hungry. So there's ways to explain away some of these biblical miracles as metaphor or symbolic or added, invented later. But again, that gets into how can we date the manuscripts and so on. But if you read the biblical account itself, nobody at the time seems to be understanding it as a metaphor. They're seeing it as a real event that really happened to them, that they witnessed. So, yeah.
I'm going to come down front. And
now it's your turn, audience. And the discussion, as I said, it's more important to listen to one another. And we have two microphones here. Stu Dresch is going to help us on one side and Dick on the other side. Please talk into the microphone because we want to get this on video so you have a record of it. And make sure that you talk into the microphone when it's handed to you. So who's going to be the brave? All I want to say, it's just not a question and answer period. You may respond here. In fact, you can even give it your own talk or your own personal view on this thing, but please just limit it to a minute, okay? So you'll be cut off otherwise. So comments and questions.
First, an aside, I'm sort of reminded of a scene I recall from the movie Oh God, when the question of frequency of miracles comes up, and I think God's answer was, well, no, I don't do them very often. In fact, the last one I can remember was the 69 Mets. I'm going to venture into an area I don't know well, but it's one that I've read a little bit, is that the other third rail of academic science is anything to do that's critical of evolution. Right, that quickly gets you into which side were you on in the Stokes trial. But But my understanding is one of the difficulties with genetic level random mutation, the basic Darwinian explanation of evolution, is that evolution seems to unfold faster than you can really justify in terms of the multi-generational dimension of how that process would work. And so it's raised, as I understand it, and I don't know if anybody has any comments about it, the question of whether within the animal kingdom, I mean, I'm talking not people, but I mean just evolution of, middle-level species, mammals, whether there is a volitional element other than the genetic mutation that gives survival advantages that speeds up the rate of evolutionary change. But see, that gets into an area where a lot of people want to rule that off the table for just this same reason. It's, you want a simple naturalistic explanation down at the cellular or practically atomic level. So I don't know. Is there any thoughts that people have on that?
There's a field that's developed out of that. It's called epigenetics. And that looks at where information in the DNA is getting turned on and turned off in the organism that allows them to respond to some environmental change. So epigenetics has kind of exploded as people go, wow, look at how that organism adapted, and we look at their genes and see what's going on, and oh, this whole set of genes has been turned on and these have been turned off, and that confers a survival advantage. The trick is that's not mutation, natural selection, right? The genes are still the genes, they've just been turned on and turned off by some of the junk DNA, by the way, in the cell, or in the organism. So that's been some of the fun, if you will, in evolutionary studies, or looking at rapid adaptation, what's causing it. And it's like, oh, it's not a Darwinian process, it's a regulatory process in the organism. So it's gotten more complicated as a result of, again, what you mentioned, people recognizing these rapid changes, and it's not happening in a Darwinian process. There's actually built into the organism a way to respond to its environment. So,
one thing that we found in the last 20 years or so with the intelligent design movement is it's just not biology. Biologists were just talking biology up until recently. Now it's an engineering problem as well. Has to be a design on the outside. There's nested hierarchical control systems that even control the DNA on the outside. That even the skin cells have epigenetic control over the DNA. Even your mind has control over the DNA, we're finding out. Jeffrey Schwartz's work at UCLA, we've used the kid mind over matter. This is true. He works with obsessive compulsive behavior cases. He's a psychiatrist and a researcher, and he takes on these very complicated obsessive compulsive behavior cases and has people thinking to control their behavior that actually changes their DNA. And I think a lot of us know that we can control a lot with our minds, and we're not a deterministic mechanism that from the outside. Up until recently, science talked determinism. The environment controls you, your genetics controls you. No, it's way beyond that. And in fact, that's one of the, that coupled with free will that you talked about is one of the things we realized, that maybe the universe is a great thought instead of a great materialistic creation. Thank you. Next one.
Enjoyed your talk tremendously. Thank you for speaking at my low level. Appreciate it. Science today realizes that the universe is expanding and spinning at warp speed faster. No more entropy. We're expanding and we're spinning faster. What does that mean, Doctor?
well, the best analogy I've heard is in terms of what's expanding in the universe and how to think of it. It's sort of weird, but space itself is expanding. Not that you're getting bigger, well, unless you eat too much, but it's not that physically objects are getting bigger, but the space between galaxies and such is getting bigger. So a nice analogy was if you make raisin bread from scratch, you make the dough, you put raisins in it, and then you let the bread rise. Well, the raisins are the galaxies. And as the dough rises, the galaxies move farther and farther, the raisins move farther and farther apart from each other. If you're on any raisin, the farther away you look in the dough, the faster the raisins seem to be moving away from you. But it's that the dough between the raisins is what's expanding. And that's the best sort of astronomy class example that I've seen given for what's going on in the universe in terms of what's the expansion. It's the space that's expanding, and the objects in it are being kind of, pushed farther and farther apart in the process.
And today's physics says that's dark energy?
Dark energy comes into the equation because it appears that the farther out you look, the faster things are moving over time. Now, I'm not taking bets, but that could disappear tomorrow. Okay, the experimental evidence for dark energy, I've seen some heavy criticism of it, but a number of these theories out there, or models out there, for what exactly is going on, are exactly that. They're our best explanation for what we're seeing going on. But the dark energy thing is like, okay, it just looks like stuff is moving a little bit faster than what the initial explosion would have caused them to move. So, and then gravity causing things to slow down as they fly away. Things are moving a little bit too fast to fit that neat little model. So that's one of the things that the James Webb is getting people excited about. It's like, okay, now we can see farther, we can get a sense for how fast things are moving out there, and what's our best explanation for that going?
Hey, let me just add on one thing, Dick, on that. 20 years ago, we started understanding dark energy and dark matter. What did we understand about it? Zero. We just know it's there by its effect. I mean, so it's circumstantial evidence, which is great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with circumstantial evidence, but we don't understand what it is. But what we do understand is if you add up all the matter and energy and do a little accounting sheet on it, only 5% of the entire universe is real matter. The other 95% is either dark matter or dark energy, which means, and the reason they call it dark is, we don't know. we don't know. So these things should be open for discussion. If we can discuss multiverses, dark energy and dark matter, we don't know. We certainly should be able to talk about intelligent design. So go ahead, Dick.
So. Yeah.
It seems as one of the basic rules of physics is entropy. So things can't become more organized without input of energy. But here we've got the universe expanding and planets being formed. But that seems like you'd have to have an external input of energy to have those things happen. So does that mean all those things are miracles?
Well, the model there is that the universe started in a very low entropy state. So as the universe expands and stars form and planets form, it's all working within the second law. There's no real need for energy input along the way, because the initial state of the universe was incredibly low entropy. Then it gets tricky. You ask, how low is that entropy state for the universe to function the way it is, the way we're seeing it? And Roger Penrose did this, I believe. The odds on having the universe initially at a low enough entropy state to form the way it did, the odds on that are 10 to the 10th to the 123rd power. So not just 10 to the 123rd power, but 10 to the 123rd power. So that was seen as one of the most incredible examples of fine-tuning in the whole universe, is that initial let there be, was so incredibly fine-tuned in its entropy, so that it can unfold with increasing entropy over time and form all the things that it did. So without needing to input any additional energy or miracles or whatever. So it's, that was a fun one in terms of fine-tuning. Is like, it's that bad? So 10 to the 10, you have an exponential in your 10 to the power.
Well, another way of saying that is 10 billion to the 123rd power. Can you imagine that multiplying 10 billion 123 times? That's even bigger than the lottery.
Well, a hand for Dr. Bloom and Dr. Orr. Thank you so much for coming.